Dear viewers across the world, most welcome to my channel NAGA World Conflict Zone. Context Islamophobia, too readily overlooked in West. An inquiry into the Islamophobia within the British Conservative Party returned its verdict last week. While it did not find the party guilty of institutional racism, it certainly highlighted disturbing trend. What it did not do, however, is end the debate, one that is ever more relevant. As anti-Muslim hatred remains so pervasive not just in the UK but in many non-Muslim majority countries without developing into every findings, what is clear is that Conservative Party members have over recent years uttered a large number of anti-Muslim comments. The party's leadership is at fault, not least Prime Minister Boris Johnson back in 2018. Before the became Prime Minister, Johnson described in a newspaper articles Muslim women who wear the burqa as looking like letterbox and bank robbers. He last week again refused to apologize while admitting he would not make such remarks now that he was Prime Minister. This is as close to confessing he was wrong as he will go. Remarkably, the panel determined that in a democratic society, it should be careful not to be over-zealous in its scrutiny or censor of language. Imagine if this had been stated about disparaging comments about black people or Jews, the outcry would be huge. The double standard very much remain at that Muslim and indeed Arabs are often fair game, and those who indulge in Islamophobia are held to a different standard than those who utter anti-Semitic or racist comment. Few commented that at the same time a report was published, Johnson was preparing to welcome the anti-Muslim Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to Downing Street. Orban's record of anti-Semitic comments was also overlooked, even by many of those who had been so vocal on to issue the recent weeks. He is accepted by some because he is a paid up member of the Anti-Semitic for Israel Club and a warm friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. Prominent Tory Muslim like Barnes Orsi, the former party chairman, believe that a full independent investigation is required, not one appointed by the party. This is what happened when the Labour Party stood accused of institutional anti-Semitism. Islamophobia in the Conservative Party should be treated just as seriously. Once again, Islamophobia does not get the attention it deserves or the acknowledgement of how widespread this issue has become. Similarly, anti-Arab racism rarely gets in mention in mainstream discourse, even though it is frequent and vicious. If often subsumed in the Islamophobia debate, imagine the outrage if one of the most revenge synagogue in the world was invaded by the armed forces of a foreign state using stun grenade, tear gas and bullet as happened at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Conflict fueled hatred. The escalation in the occupied territories and Israel over the last 2 months have seen tension triggered elsewhere. Once again, outbreak of the Islamophobia and anti-Semitism had soiled the streets of Europe, the US and elsewhere. The bigots feel entitled and empowered to six, release their pent-up fury and on those who have nothing to do with event in the Middle East, as if somehow it is justified in their whole little universe. One incident in London where 6 cars drove through a largely Jewish neighborhood with the odious passengers screaming up unprintable obscenities against Jews was one of the worst examples. It seems these extremists feel empowered by conflict to vent their hatred. Jewish communities in Europe are not responsible for Israeli crimes, just as Muslims worldwide are not responsible for the crimes of Al-Aqsa or Daesh. Sadly, such hatred is not confined to the street, but it is found in newspaper, the broadcast media, and perhaps most notably of all, online collective demonizations is frequent. The presence of a Jewish few overtly anti-Semitic banner at a protest in London led some to demonize all 180,000 protesters as anti-Semitics and being in a pro-Hamas march, as opposed to one devoted to Palestine rights. High-profile football stars like Paul Pogba and Mo Salah were slammed for showing solidarity with Palestinians, as if supporting Palestine's freedom and right was a crime. The New York Times ran a front page filled with the image of the 67 Palestinian children recently killed in Gaza, but this was too great a humanization of the Palestinians for some, who made a grand show of cancelling their subscriptions. For all the myriad examples of Islamophobia and anti-Arab attitude one can pick out in the Western's media and political discourse. What really highlights the scale of the challenges are the policies of various Western governments toward the Arab and Islam world and the overall reactions to events in the Middle East. If an Arab is executed on camera by Daesh, hardly anyone bats an eyelid. But if it is a Westerner, then hold the front page. If Americans were being killed in their thousands, do you think US leader would be seen to say, we don't do body count? But when 2 million Palestinians in Gaza are stuck in an open-air prison under blockade for 14 years in subhuman conditions and world does nothing, what message does that send about American and European attitude toward Arab and Muslims? Americans and European racist attitude are most clearly on show in terms of immigrations rather than welcoming Syrian refugees fleeing an extraordinarily brutal regimes. And the Ubar extremists of Daesh, many European states put up barrier. Denmark is even trying to send Syria back to their country, declaring it to be safe. Donald Trump in 2015 called for a total and complete shutdown of the Muslim entering the US, and he attempted to make this a reality when he became president. The Republican Party has yet to properly distance itself from the policy. Such positions do not cost politicians their jobs. Muslims see that, on the contrary, more often than not, Muslim bashing is extremely electorally profitable. This is the particular noticeable in France, where President Emmanuel Macron has upped his rhetoric description Islam as a faith in crisis all over the world. His likely opponent in next year's presidential election, Marine Le Pen, was not to be outdone and recently proclaimed that France was at risk of civil war. Holding members of a single political party accountable for their racism is admirable. However, this is just a minor step when true and long-lasting change also has to be driven from the top. It requires leaderships to challenge a host of inherited attitude and prejudice against Muslim and Arab as well as others that still inform policies at present. It is hard to see where this leadership is coming from. Chris Doyle is a director of the London-based Council for Arab British Understanding, credited